this In most cases, the seasonal major depressive episodes begin in fall or winter and remit in spring. Less commonly, there may be recurrent summer depressive episodes. This pattern of onset and remission of episodes must have occurred during at least a 2-year period, without any non-seasonal episodes occurring during this period. In addition, the seasonal depressive manic or hypermanic episodes must substantially outnumber any non-seasonal depressive manic or hypermanic episodes over the individual's lifetime. This specifier does not apply to those situations in which the pattern is better explained by seasonally linked psychosocial stressors, e.g., examples, seasonal unemployment or school schedule. It is unclear whether a seasonal pattern of major depressive episodes is more likely in recurrent major depressive disorder or in bipolar disorders. However, within the bipolar disorders group, a seasonal pattern of major depressive episodes appears to be more likely in bipolar 2 disorder than in bipolar 1 disorder. In some individuals, the onset of manic or hypomanic episodes may also be linked to a particular season, with peak seasonality of mania or hypomania from spring through summer. The prevalence of winter-type seasonal pattern appears in some individuals. The onset of manic or hypomanic episodes may also be linked to the season, with peak seasonality of mania from spring through summer. The prevalence of winter-type seasonal patterns appears to vary with latitude, age, and sex. What the fuck? The prevalence of winter seasonal patterns appears to vary with latitude, age, and sex. Prevalence increases with higher latitudes. Age is also a strong predictor of seasonality, with younger persons at higher risk for winter depressive episodes. If partial missing symptoms of the immediate previous manic or major depressive episode are present but full 13 months or there is a period lasting less than 2 months without any significant symptoms of full remission during the past 2 months, no significant signs of specific severity is based on the number of symptoms or those symptoms in the group. Mild, minimum symptom criteria met for manic. Moderate, very significant increase in judgment. Severe, almost continual supervision is required in order to prevent physical harm to self or others. Severity is based on the number of criteria and symptoms, severity of those symptoms, and the degree. Specify current severity of major depressive episode. Severity is based on the number of criteria, symptoms, the severity of those symptoms, and the degree of functional. Few, if any, symptoms in excess of those required to make the diagnosis are present. The intensity of the symptoms is distressing but manageable, and the symptoms result in minor impairment in social and occupational functioning. Moderate, the number of symptoms, intensity of symptoms, and or functional impairment are between those specified for mild and severe. Severe, the number of symptoms is substantially in excess of that required to make the diagnosis. The intensity of the symptoms is seriously distressing and manageable. The intensity of the symptoms is seriously distressing and unmanageable, and the symptoms markedly interfere with social and occupational functioning. All right, then we got a footnote. Oh my, we're so done. Let's go. Oh my. All right. In distinguishing grief from a major depressive episode, it's useful to consider that in grief, the predominant effect is feelings of emptiness and loss, while in major depressive episode, it's persistent depressed mood and the inability to anticipate happiness or pleasure. The dysphoria in grief is likely to decrease in intensity over days to weeks and occurs in waves, the so-called pangs of grief. These waves tend to be associated with thoughts or reminders of the deceased. The depressed mood of major depressive episode is more persistent and not tied to specific thoughts or preoccupations. Yo, are you dumb, bro? That's literally what the social media is. It's like, this is fully grief. That's what I've been saying the whole time. The depressed mood of a is more persistent, not tied to specific thoughts or the pain of grief may be accompanied by positive emotions. Bro, what are we even talking about here? This is literally it. You not read the DSM-5, you goofs? What are the goofs doing here? Okay. Seems like... Okay, let's write this down. I had grief. Grief, not depression. Period. Alright. Let's do... Exclamation point. Alright. Now let's read more about it. It's useful to consider that grief in the predominant effect of feeling emptiness and loss while in persistent. I just wrote, whatever. I don't know. Anyways, distinguish grief from major depressive episode. It is useful to consider that grief is a predominant effect feeling of emptiness, loss, while a major depressive episode is persistent depressed mood and the inability to anticipate happiness or pleasure. Dysphoria in grief is likely to decrease in intensity over days or weeks and occurs in waves, the so-called pangs of grief. These waves tend to be associated with thoughts or reminders of the deceased. The depressed mood of a major depressive episode is more persistent and not tied to specific thoughts or preoccupations. The pain of grief may be accompanied by positive emotions and humor that are uncharacteristic of the pervasive unhappiness and misery characteristic of major depressive episode. The thought content associated with grief generally features a preoccupation with thoughts and memories of the deceased rather than self-critical or pessimistic ruminations seen in major depressive episode. In grief, self-esteem is generally preserved, whereas in major depressive episode, feelings of worthlessness and self-loathing are common. In self-derogatory ideation, if self-derogatory ideation is present in grief, it typically involves perceived failings. Oh my. Typically involves perceived failings like deleting social media. What are we talking about here? Perceived failings vis-a-vis the deceased, either not visiting frequently enough, not telling the deceased how much he or she was loved. If bereaved individuals think about death and dying, such thoughts are generally focused on the deceased and possibly about joining the deceased, whereas in major depressive episodes, such thoughts are focused on ending one's own life because of feeling worthless, undeserving of life, or unable to cope with pain of depression. In distinguishing grief from major depressive episodes, it is useful to consider that grief is the predominant affect. In grief, the predominant affect is feeling of emptiness and loss, which is literally what I always said about social media. Like, what are we talking about? It's useful to consider that grief is the predominant affect of feeling emptiness and loss, while major depressive episode is persistent depressed mood and inability to anticipate happiness or pleasure. The dysphoria in grief is likely to decrease in intensity over days to weeks and occurs in waves, the so-called pangs of grief. These waves tend to be associated with thoughts or reminders of the deceased. What? Did you put the same thing twice in the DSM-5? Does no one read this? How do you have a... Is this the exact same thing? Who writes this? Come on now, guys. Come on. The doctors. You didn't even read this section because you didn't even notice that I swear they're saying the same thing twice. They're saying the exact same thing twice. The depressed mood of... This is funny. Come on now. I've been saying that a little bit less smart for a while. That not all the doctors, but in general, just because you went to med school doesn't mean that you are big brain. It might just mean that you studied a lot, and that's good, but I don't know. How do we miss this? Come on. No one's rereading this thing? You double print the paragraph. Oh, let's see. It is useful to consider that grief is a predominant effect in the feelings of emptiness or loss. One is a persistent depressed mood and ability to blah blah blah. Destroying grief likes to decrease. So-called pangs of grief, these waves tend to be associated with thoughts or reminders of disease. The depressed mood of it is more persistent and not tied to specific thoughts or preoccupations. The pain of grief accompanied by positive emotions and humor that are uncharacteristic of the producer's unhappy misery characteristics. The thought content associated with grief generally features a preoccupation with thoughts and memories of the deceased. In grief, self-esteem is generally preserved, whereas in the feeling of worth and self-love, remember the doctors always used to say, "Oh, you don't like you so hard on yourself," and I'd be like, "No, because I know I'm capable of great things." Like, I was just like, just try to repeat the same thing over and over again until you agree with them, and it's like, oh, they're nice. Like, you don't want to make them. Like, what am I supposed to do? Just, like, insult their intelligence? Like, no, you're wrong. Like, I don't know. In self-derogatory ideation if self-derogatory ideation is present in grief, it typically involves perceived feelings. Usually it is not. How much is bereaved and Bill thinks death plans join in the deceased, whereas in such thoughts are focused on one's own life. Worthless, undeserving. They're not like unable to cope with the pain of depression. Nice. Oh, now we're on to depressive disorders, baby. Let's go. Let's go. We put in the work. Let's go. What page is that on? Yo, this is a banger page. This is the banger page. 176. This is the heater. Yo, let's go. Oh, baby. Baby.